He saw her climb into his car on New Year's Eve, tears streaming down her face, whispering desperately, "Please just drive." Sebastian Ashford said nothing. He didn't tell her he wasn't the driver. He didn't tell her he owned the hotel. She'd just fled. He simply drove. And when she whispered her deepest fear into the darkness between them, asking if someone her age could ever learn to love again, he gave her the only honest answer he had. But how did a mistaken ride become something neither of them could walk away from? Let me take you back. The Ashford Estate Hotel perched on the Rhode Island cliffs like something from another era. All weathered stone and ivy-covered walls, floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking an ocean that had witnessed a century of storms. Sebastian stood at those windows now, alone in the ballroom where 200 guests celebrated below. He'd inherited the hotel 8 months ago when his father died. 42 years old. Successful by every measure that mattered to the world outside these walls. The Ashford name still meant something in Newport. Old money, established legacy, impeccable reputation. None of it filled the silence. He loosened his bow tie, watching couples dance below. The New Year's Eve gala was his mother's tradition, one he'd continued out of obligation, not joy. She'd passed 3 years ago. His father had followed, broken by grief disguised as a heart condition, and Camille had left 6 months before that. The memory surfaced unbidden, his ex-wife's voice, cool and precise. At that charity gala last spring, "I'm in love with someone else, someone with a future, not just a past." She'd said it in front of half of Newport society. Then she'd walked out on his arm. Marcus Webb, tech entrepreneur, 15 years younger. Everything Sebastian apparently wasn't. He'd promised himself that night he was done. Love was transactional. People stayed when you were useful, left when you weren't. The crowd below counted down. 10, 9, 8. Sebastian turned from the window. He had work waiting in the study. Estate documents, permits. The endless requirements of his father's will. Restore the property to its original 1924 elegance within 18 months, or lose it to his cousin Harrison, who'd demolish it for condos without a second thought. 4, 3, 2. Fireworks exploded over the harbor, gold and silver against the winter sky. The crowd cheered. Champagne corks popped. Someone started singing. Sebastian walked out through the side entrance, into the frozen parking lot, headed for his car. He needed silence. Distance. The kind of solitude only money could buy. He had no idea his life was about to change completely. Isabel Morgan had been arranging flowers since dawn. The Ashford Estate Gala was her biggest contract of the season. $3,000 for centerpieces, entrance arrangements, and midnight displays. Money her struggling shop desperately needed. She'd worked alone, hands moving efficiently through roses and winter jasmine, creating something beautiful for people who'd never notice her name. Now, nearly midnight, she adjusted the final centerpiece and allowed herself one moment of pride. The work was good, professional, elegant. Then she saw him, David G. Hartley, her ex-fiancé, walking through the ballroom doors with Rachel Porter on his arm. Isabel's hands went cold. They looked radiant. David in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, Rachel in champagne silk that caught the light, and on Rachel's left hand, a ring, new, large, unmistakable. Isabel's chest tightened, but she kept working. Adjusted a rose that didn't need adjusting, checked a ribbon that was already perfect. Rachel saw her, broke away from David, walking over with a smile that seemed genuinely kind, which somehow made it worse. "Izzy. Soft. Gentle. I'm so glad you're here. I wanted to tell you personally before you heard from someone else. David and I were engaged." A pause. I hope, truly, we can still be friends someday. Isabel forced her face into something resembling a smile. Her voice came out steady, professional. Congratulations. I hope you're both very happy. Rachel touched her arm. Thank you for understanding. Then she was gone, returning to David, who wrapped an arm around her waist like it was the most natural thing in the world. Isabel finished her work, packed her supplies with hands that trembled only slightly, walked through the ballroom with her head high, nodding politely at guests who didn't see her. She made it outside before the mask cracked. The parking lot was empty, frozen, quiet, except for the distant sound of music and laughter from inside. Fireworks began exploding overhead, gold and silver against black sky. Voices shouting, "Happy New Year" echoed through the cold air. Isabel stood alone in the December cold and finally let herself feel it. 37 years old. She'd smiled and congratulated the two people who'd betrayed her 6 months ago, had wished them happiness, while her own life felt like it was crumbling. The tears came silently. She pressed her hands against a stone column, trying to breathe through the tightness in her chest. Her hands shook too badly to find her car keys. Then she saw it. A black Bentley, engine running, door slightly open. Hotel car service, she thought distantly. Probably waiting for guests. She didn't think, just moved. Opened the door and slid into the back seat, desperate for a moment of privacy before she had to drive herself home to an empty apartment. A man sat in the driver's seat. Dark suit, broad shoulders. She couldn't see his face clearly in the dim light. "Please, just drive," she whispered. He turned slightly. She caught a glimpse of strong features, dark eyes that seemed to see too much. He didn't ask questions, simply put the car in gear and drove. They drove through Newport in complete silence. Sebastian's hands were steady on the wheel, but his mind was racing. He'd recognized her the moment she'd opened his door. The woman from the wedding 2 weeks ago. He'd been there on business, watching from the back of the room while the ceremony proceeded, and he'd seen her. She'd been arranging flowers at the reception, moving quietly between tables. A young server, maybe 19, visibly exhausted, had stumbled, nearly dropping a tray. The restaurant manager had appeared instantly, furious, pulling the girl aside with a harsh whisper that carried across the room. "No dinner break. You work through or you're fired." Isabel had been watching. When the manager left, she'd walked over to the girl, smiled gently, and handed her a plated dinner from one of the tables. "You look exhausted," she'd said simply. "Eat this. I already had mine." The girl had nearly cried with gratitude. Isabel had just waved it off and returned to her flowers. Sebastian had checked later. Isabel had gone without dinner that night. She'd given away her own food without hesitation, then worked another 3 hours arranging centerpieces on an empty stomach. That simple act of generosity, unconscious, unthinking kindness, had stayed with him. In a world where everyone wanted something, she'd given freely and expected nothing. Now she sat in his back seat, crying silently, and he had no idea what to say. Fireworks exploded over the harbor, reflecting in the dark water. The car's heater hummed softly. Isabel's breathing slowly steadied. 5 minutes passed before she finally spoke, voice barely above a whisper. "Morgan's Flowers. Main Street, please." He nodded once, adjusted his route without comment. More silence. The city lights blurred past. Midnight arrived with distant bells and car horns. Then, so quietly he almost didn't hear it, she spoke again, talking more to herself than to him, staring out the window at the frozen world beyond. "I'm 37. I just congratulated my ex-fiancé on his engagement to my best friend. And all I can think is, what if I'm too late? What if I wasted so much time on the wrong people that I'll never..." Her voice broke. Can someone my age still learn to trust again, to love again? Sebastian's hands tightened on the wheel. The question hit somewhere deep, in a place he'd sealed off after Camille, after learning that love was just another transaction, another contract that could be broken when someone found a better deal. He took a breath before answering, keeping his voice low and careful. I think, for some people, maybe, if they're braver than I am. He felt her gaze shift to the rearview mirror. When their eyes met in the reflection, something passed between them. Recognition of shared pain, understanding of old wounds that hadn't quite healed. You don't believe it's possible? She whispered. Long pause. The truth felt too heavy to speak, but he said it anyway. Not for me, but maybe for you. They reached Main Street. He pulled to the curb in front of a small shop with a hand-painted sign. Morgan's Flowers. The windows were dark, but fairy lights still glowed in the display, illuminating winter arrangements that looked exactly like her work at the gala. Isabel wiped her eyes carefully, trying to salvage what remained of her makeup. She reached for her purse, hesitating. How much do I? Nothing. He interrupted gently. Happy New Year! She looked at him in the mirror. One more time. Really, Luke. There was something in his eyes that made her chest tighten again. Not with pain this time, but with something else. Something she couldn't name. Thank you, she said softly. For driving, and for what you said. She stepped out into the cold, unlocked her shop with hands that barely shook now. The light inside clicked on, illuminating workspace and unsold arrangements and the life she'd built alone. Sebastian watched until she was safely inside. Then he noticed the business card that had fallen from her purse onto the back seat. Morgan's Flowers. Isabel Morgan. Event Floristry. He picked it up, studied the simple design, the elegant font, the phone number written in the corner. He didn't know why, but he slipped the card into his jacket pocket. 3 blocks away, his phone buzzed. Text from his estate lawyer. Need to discuss garden permits. Delays getting worse. Call Monday. Sebastian stared at the message. The permits, the deadline, the clause in his father's will that required the estate gardens to be restored to their original 1924 design. Authentic period plantings, historically accurate layouts, the kind of work that required an expert eye and botanical knowledge he didn't possess. He had 6 months to complete it, or lose everything. His hand found the business card in his pocket. He told himself it was just practical. She was clearly talented, professional, experienced with high-end events and historical aesthetics. But as he drove home through the empty streets, he couldn't stop thinking about the way she'd cried so quietly, the way she'd asked if it was too late to start over. The way he'd told her it wasn't possible for him. But maybe, just maybe, it was for her. He slipped the card into his pocket, and wondered for the first time in years, whether someone like him, someone who'd stopped believing in second chances, deserved to reach for one anyway. The pipe burst at 4 in the morning. Isabel woke to the sound of water rushing, a hiss that grew louder with each second. She stumbled from her apartment above the shop into freezing darkness, feet splashing through an inch of water that shouldn't be there. When she flipped the lights, her heart stopped. The main water pipe had burst in the shop's back wall. Water poured from the ceiling, soaking the floor, the work tables, the refrigeration units that held thousands of dollars of inventory for upcoming events. Roses and lilies and tulips, drowning in the flood. She grabbed her phone with shaking hands. Cold, emergency plumbing. Tried to salvage what she could, hauling containers to higher ground. Her pajamas and hands and face soaked within minutes. The plumber arrived at 5:30, surveyed the damage with the kind of slow head shake that meant nothing good. Pipes been deteriorating for months. Buildings old. This is gonna be expensive. By dawn, the water was off and the damage was clear. Everything was ruined. Inventory. Equipment. The vintage display cooler she'd bought, used, but lovingly maintained. The floor was warped. The walls showed water damage that meant mold would follow if not addressed immediately. The plumber's estimate, $12,000. Minimum. Isabel's insurance had lapsed 3 months ago. She'd had to choose between the premium and her mother's medication. The choice had been easy then. Now, it felt impossible. She sat on the front step, as sunrise painted the frozen street in shades of gold and gray. Her phone showed 17 missed calls from clients whose orders were now destroyed. Her bank account showed $847. Rent was due in 3 weeks. Her mother's prescriptions needed refilling in 10 days. She put her head in her hands and tried very hard not to cry again. She'd cried enough last night. Crying wouldn't fix the pipes or replace the inventory or save the business she'd built from nothing over the past 8 years. A car pulled to the curb. She didn't look up. Probably another vendor or client who'd heard somehow come to survey the damage and pull their contract. Ms. Morgan. The voice made her lift her head. A man stood on the sidewalk, tall, maybe early 40s, in a dark wool coat that looked expensive. Strong features, dark eyes that seemed familiar somehow. He held a business card. Her business card. "I'm Sebastian Ashford," he said quietly. "I own the Ashford Estate Hotel. We haven't been formally introduced, but I saw your work last night at the gala, and I have a proposition." The estate library smelled of old books and wood polish. Afternoon light streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the warm air. Isabel sat in a leather chair that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Hands wrapped around a cup of tea she hadn't touched. Sebastian sat across from her, patient, waiting. She still couldn't quite process how she'd gotten here. This morning she'd been drowning. Literally and figuratively. The shop destroyed, inventory ruined, clients canceling, no insurance, no savings, no options. Then Sebastian Ashford had appeared, and he'd offered her something impossible. "I need someone to restore the estate gardens," he'd said simply, standing in front of her ruined shop. "My father's will requires authentic 1924 period planting and design. If it's not completed by July 4th, I lose the property. I've had 3 consultants tell me it can't be done in 6 months. I need someone who understands historical design and can execute under pressure." He'd paused, those dark eyes studying her carefully. "I saw your work last night. The winter jasmine arrangement near the entrance used varieties that haven't been commercially available for decades. You sourced them somewhere. You understand, period authenticity. And you need a contract that pays well and starts immediately." The offer had been staggering. 6 months, live-in cottage on the property. Salary that would save her business, and then some. Full creative control over the garden restoration and all hotel floral arrangements. It was too good to be true, which meant there had to be a catch. "Why me?" she'd asked. "You could hire anyone. Someone with credentials. A firm." "I could," he'd agreed, "but I don't trust firms. They care about billable hours and protecting their reputation. You care about the work itself. You don't know that. I saw you at a wedding 2 weeks ago." His voice had been quiet, but certain. "You gave your dinner to a server who was being mistreated. You went hungry so a stranger could eat. That's not strategy. That's character." Das single quotes. Now, sitting in the estate library, Isabel stared at the contract he'd placed on the table between them. 6 months. January 1st through July 4th. Everything she needed to rebuild. Everything she'd lost, and more. "There's something you should know," Sebastian said, breaking the silence. "The estate has a complicated situation. My cousin Harrison was my father's business partner. He wants this property demolished for condos. If I fail to meet the will's requirements, he gets ownership and I lose everything my family built for a century. That's why the timeline is so tight, Isabel said slowly. Yes. And why Harrison will likely make this difficult. He's already delayed permits, convinced contractors to quit, spread rumors about my fitness to manage the estate. Sebastian's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I'm telling you this because if you take this contract, you'll be caught in the middle. It won't be easy. Isabel looked at him, really looked. There was exhaustion in the lines around his eyes. Grief, old, but still present. And underneath it all, a quiet desperation he was trying very hard to hide. She recognized that look. She'd seen it in her own mirror this morning. I need to be honest too, she said quietly. My shop flooded this morning. I have no insurance. $800 in savings. And a mother with Alzheimer's who needs medication I help pay for. I need this contract, not just because I want it. I need it to survive. Sebastian nodded slowly. Then we understand each other. I think we do. She picked up the pen, signed her name, Isabel Morgan. When she looked up, Sebastian was watching her with something that looked almost like relief. The cottage is ready whenever you'd like to move in, he said. I thought you might want to see the gardens first. Understand what you're agreeing to. They walked through the estate grounds as sunset painted the coastal cliffs in shades of amber and rose. The gardens were overgrown, wild, barely recognizable as designed space, but underneath the chaos, Isabel could see the bones of something beautiful. There were roses here, she said, kneeling beside a tangle of dead vines. Probably climbers. And this section would have been herbs, lavender, rosemary, thyme. The soil is good, the structure is still intact. It's not destroyed, it's just sleeping. Can you wake it up? Sebastian asked quietly. Isabel stood brushing dirt from her hands. The ocean stretched beyond the cliffs, vast and dark and beautiful. Wind carried the scent of salt and earth. Yes, she said, I can. That night, alone in the cottage Sebastian had given her, Isabel unpacked her few belongings. The space was small, but perfect. Stone fireplace, kitchen with herb garden window boxers, bedroom overlooking the ocean. She should have been relieved, grateful, celebrating. Instead, she kept thinking about Sebastian's eyes when he'd said he didn't believe love was possible for him, and wondering what, or who, had broken him so completely. Isabel discovered quickly that Sebastian was a ghost. She'd been living in the cottage for 2 weeks, working dawn to dusk on garden restoration. The work was brutal, clearing overgrowth, testing soil, researching historical records to determine original plantings. Her hands were raw, and her back ached. But she'd never been happier. The gardens were responding, sleeping beauties, waking up. But Sebastian himself, she barely saw him. He worked in the main house, library or study or office. She wasn't sure which. Sometimes she'd catch a glimpse through windows. Always alone. Always working. She'd left thank you notes for the cottage, for the contract, for the trust he'd shown in hiring her. Never received a response. It was like living with a particularly considerate ghost. Then, one night in late January, everything changed. Isabel had been in the estate library researching heritage rose varieties. The historical records were kept in leather-bound ledgers, dating back to the hotel's opening in 1924. She loved the work, tracing what had grown where, matching period photographs to planting records, solving the puzzle of what belonged in the lost gardens. She was cross-referencing a 1985 supply order when something caught her eye. The purchase listed 500 lavender plants from Henderson Botanical Supply, but the accompanying planting record showed only 200 lavender plants installed that year. 300 plants unaccounted for. She frowned, making a note. Probably clerical error. Old records were notoriously messy, but it nagged at her. She checked another year. Same supplier, same discrepancy. Materials, purchased, but never planted, and the amounts were significant. Thousands of dollars, across multiple years. Finding everything you need? Isabel jumped. Sebastian stood in the library doorway, holding 2 mugs of something that steamed in the cool air. She hadn't heard him approach. "I didn't mean to startle you," he said quietly. "I saw the light. Thought you might want tea." He crossed the room, set 1 mug beside her. Their fingers nearly touched. "Didn't?" "Thank you," Isabel said. The tea smelled of bergamot and warmth. "I didn't realize you were still awake. I don't sleep much." Sebastian glanced at the ledgers spread across the table. "Finding what you need, yes. Mostly." She hesitated. "There's something odd in these older records. Purchase orders that don't match planting records. Probably just clerical errors. But if the estate board audits our work, these discrepancies could hurt you." Sebastian leaned over her shoulder to look. He was close enough that she could smell cedar and winter cold clinging to his coat. Close enough to see the exhaustion etched in the lines of his face. "What kind of discrepancies?" he asked. She showed him. 3 years' worth, different suppliers, different materials, same pattern, purchases that appeared on paper, but never manifested in the gardens. "Huh." Sebastian's voice was tight. "That is odd." "It's probably nothing," Isabel said quickly. "Old estates always have messy records, but I thought you should know. Just in case." "Thank you." He straightened, putting careful distance between them again. "I appreciate you looking out for potential problems." They stood in awkward silence for a moment. Isabel sipped her tea. Sebastian stared at the ledgers like they were a puzzle he couldn't solve. "You work too much," Isabel said suddenly. "I see the lights in your office. 3 in the morning. 4? You're going to burn out." Something flickered in Sebastian's eyes. "So do you. I see the cottage lights at the same hours. That's different. I love this work. And I love this estate." His voice was quiet, but fierce. "It's all I have left of them. My parents, the only thing I can protect." The vulnerability in those words made Isabel's chest tighten. Before she could think better of it, she spoke. "You can't protect something you destroy yourself trying to save." Sebastian looked at her, then really looked, and for just a moment, his carefully controlled expression cracked. She saw the grief underneath. The loneliness, the desperate need to prove he was worth something. It was like looking in a mirror. "I should go," he said abruptly. "Let you work. Thank you for the notes about the records." He was gone before she could respond. Isabel sat alone in the library, hands wrapped around the mug he'd brought her, staring at the doorway where he'd disappeared. She'd come here to save her business, to survive. She hadn't expected to find someone who understood what it felt like to drown while everyone else saw success. But Sebastian did. She could see it in his eyes. The question was whether either of them was brave enough to reach for help. Harrison Ashford arrived on a Tuesday, in February, like a storm cloud dressed in Tom Ford. Isabel was working in the East Garden when a silver Mercedes pulled up to the main house. A man stepped out, Lachi Forti's expensive suit, the kind of manufactured charm that set her teeth on edge immediately. He saw her kneeling in the dirt, raised beds half constructed around her. "And who might you be?" The smile didn't reach his eyes. "Isabel Morgan. I'm restoring the gardens." "Ah, the florist." He made it sound like an insult. "I'm Harrison Sebastian's cousin. I handle the estate's business interests." He walked closer, surveying her work with obvious disdain. Quite an undertaking. I hope for your sake, Sebastian's paying you well. He has a tendency to make promises he can't keep. Isabel kept her voice level. The contract is fair. I'm sure it is. Sebastian excels at appearing generous. It's the follow-through that's problematic. Harrison crouched beside her raised bed, running a finger along the new wood. These materials, they're not period authentic. They're reclaimed 1920s oak from a demolished estate in Connecticut, Isabel said calmly. Authenticated and documented, as close to authentic as possible without literally tearing apart another historic building. Harrison's smile tightened. Clever. I'm sure the estate board will appreciate the creativity. He stood, brushing dirt from his hands, with distaste. A word of advice, Ms. Morgan. Sebastian is very good at convincing people to invest in his dreams. His ex-wife learned that lesson the hard way. I'd hate to see you waste 6 months of your life on a project that's doomed to fail. The project isn't doomed, isn't it? Harrison glanced at the overgrown grounds, the half-finished beds, the enormous amount of work still ahead. 6 months to restore a century of neglect. The permits alone could take that long. And Sebastian has made so many enemies in Newport, trying to control everything himself. People, remember, they hold grudges. He headed back to his car, pausing at the door. When this falls apart, and it will, I want you to know, I tried to warn you. Sebastian uses people. It's what he does. Don't say I didn't tell you. The Mercedes disappeared down the long driveway. Isabel returned to her work, hands shaking slightly. Not from fear, from anger. That evening she left Sebastian a note in the library. First time she'd initiated contact since their late-night tea conversation. Met your cousin today. Charming mung. Also, found more discrepancies in the 1987 to 1990 records. Same supplier. Same pattern. Might be worth investigating before the board reviews our work. She didn't mention Harrison's warnings, didn't ask about the ex-wife or the accusations or the promises allegedly broken. She just planted the seed and hoped Sebastian would see what she was seeing. Something wasn't right with those old records, and Harrison's visit felt less like concern and more like a threat. The gardens started coming back to life in March. Isabel worked 16-hour days, hands deep in soil, coaxing heritage roses from dormancy, planting lavender where lavender had grown a century before. The work was consuming. Beautiful. Exactly what she needed. And every few days, she'd find Sebastian in the library. After midnight, still working, surviving on coffee and stubborn determination. She started leaving things for him. Small flower arrangements first, nothing elaborate, just whatever needed pruning that day. A note tucked underneath, the roses needed cutting anyway. Then thermoses of tea, when she noticed he worked through dinner. Notes, getting slightly longer. Drink something warm. The gardens can wait until tomorrow. He never acknowledged them directly. But the mugs were always empty when she checked, and sometimes, rarely, she'd find a note of his own. Thank you for thinking of me. The tea helped, or, the roses are beautiful. Like everything you touch, they were building something. Not friendship exactly. Something more fragile. A tentative understanding between two people who'd both learned that trust was dangerous. Then, one frozen evening in late March, Isabel made a mistake. She was carrying a tray of starter plants from the greenhouse to the cottage when her foot caught on uneven stone. She went down hard, the tray exploding, ceramic pots shattering, soil and fragile seedlings scattering across the path. Pain shot through her ankle. Sharp, immediate. She tried to stand, couldn't. Damn it, she whispered, sitting in the wreckage of weeks of work. The seedling she'd been nurturing, Rare heritage varieties that had taken months to source were destroyed. Isabel, Sebastian appeared from nowhere, moving fast. He took in the scene instantly. Her on the ground, the shattered pots, the way she was cradling her ankle. Don't move. He crouched beside her, gentle hands checking for injury. Can you put weight on it? I don't think it's broken, just twisted. But her voice shook. Without asking permission, Sebastian scooped her up, just lifted her, like she weighed nothing. One arm under her knees, the other supporting her back. Isabel's breath caught. You don't have to, I know. His voice was rough, but I am. He carried her to the cottage, kicked the door open with more force than necessary, set her carefully on the couch. His hands were shaking slightly. Ice, he muttered, disappearing into the kitchen. He returned with frozen peas, wrapped in a towel, kneeling to elevate her foot, pressing the ice against her swelling ankle with surprising gentleness. Thank you, Isabel whispered. I'm sorry about the seedlings. Those were. I don't care about the seedlings. Sebastian's voice cracked. You could have been seriously hurt. Their eyes met. Held. Something passed between them. Something neither was ready to name. Why do you care? Isabel asked quietly. We barely know each other. Sebastian was silent for a long moment, hands still holding the ice against her ankle, face tight with something that looked like pain. Because watching you work, he finally said, voice barely audible, is the first time in 2 years I've felt anything besides empty. The confession hung between them. Raw. Honest. Terrifying. Isabel reached out slowly, gave him time to pull away. When he didn't, she rested her hand over his. I know what empty feels like, she whispered. I know what it's like to go through the motions and pretend you're fine when everything inside you is breaking. I'm not good at this, Sebastian said, still not looking at her. Caring. Letting people in. The last time I did, she laughed. Isabel finished, gently. I know. Harrison mentioned your ex-wife. Sebastian's laugh was bitter. Did he? I'm sure he had nothing but kind things to say. He said you make promises you can't keep. And you believed him. No. Isabel's hand tightened on his. Because I've been here 2 months and you've kept every single promise you made. The cottage, the salary, the creative freedom, even the little things. Tea when I'm working late, making sure the greenhouse heater's fixed. You keep promises. Sebastian, it's one of the first things I noticed about you. He finally looked at her. Those dark eyes were full of something Isabel couldn't quite read. Longing, maybe, or fear, or both. Camille said, I cared more about dead things than living ones. He said quietly, that I loved this estate more than I ever loved her. She was probably right. Or maybe she never understood that you show love through protection, through creating something that lasts. Isabel's voice was gentle, but certain. That's not a weakness, Sebastian. It's a gift. He stared at her like she'd spoken a language he'd forgotten existed. Then he turned away, voice barely audible. I should go. But he didn't move. Finally, very slowly, he lifted her hand to his lips, kissed her knuckles once. Soft, reverent. You scare me, he whispered against her skin. You scare me, too. Why? Because, Isabel said, heart pounding, I'm starting to believe that maybe we both deserve more than emptiness. Sebastian closed his eyes. His thumb traced circles on her palm, unconscious and gentle. That night, they didn't kiss, didn't make promises, neither was ready to keep, but Sebastian stayed until the swelling went down, until Isabel's pain faded to a dull ache, until dawn painted the cottage windows pink and gold. And when he finally left, Isabel realized something that should have terrified her. She was falling for a man who didn't believe in love anymore. The question was whether she was brave enough to prove him wrong. April arrived with unseasonable warmth in Harrison's first real attack. The gardens were over halfway done. Rose trellises installed. Herb beds flourishing. The greenhouse full of heritage varieties ready for final planting. They were on schedule. Ahead. Even. Then, the permits were denied. Isabel found out when Sebastian appeared at the cottage, face pale, holding an official letter from the Newport Historical Commission. They're saying our materials aren't period authentic. His voice was tight with barely controlled fury. That the documentation is insufficient. That we need to halt all work pending a full board review. That's insane. I have authentication papers for everything. Receipts, provenance, documents. We've been meticulous. I know. Sebastian's hands crumpled the letter. But Harrison sits on the commission board. He has influence. And this delays us by at least 2 months. We don't have 2 months. The deadline is July 4th. Can we appeal? It'll take weeks, just to schedule a hearing. They stood in the cottage doorway. Disaster looming. Months of work threatened by bureaucracy and manipulation. There has to be something we can do, Isabel said. There is. Sebastian's voice was hollow. I can give up. Let Harrison have the estate. Stop fighting a battle I'm going to lose anyway. No. Isabel grabbed his arm. Absolutely not. We're not giving up. Why? He turned on her, pain raw in his eyes. Why do you care? You have your money. The contract pays out, even if we fail. You could walk away right now with everything you need to rebuild your business. Because this isn't about money. Isabel's voice cracked. It's about proving that beautiful things can be brought back. That what's broken can be healed. That, she stopped. Couldn't finish. Sebastian stared at her. That, what? That people like us, she whispered, who've been used and betrayed and broken, we deserve second chances too. The silence stretched between them. Heavy, fragile. I don't know how to do this, Sebastian said finally. Care about someone again, risk it. Every instinct I have says protect yourself. Don't let anyone close enough to hurt you. I know, I feel exactly the same. Then why? Because I see you. Isabel stepped closer, one hand on his chest, feeling his heart beat rabbit fast under her palm. I see you working until dawn to save your father's legacy. I see you leaving me tea when you think I need it. I see the way you care for things everyone else has given up on. And her voice broke. I'm falling in love with you, Sebastian. And it terrifies me, because I don't know if you'll ever believe you deserve to be loved back. Sebastian's breath caught. For one long moment, he just stared at her like she'd performed a miracle. Then he kissed her. Not tentatively, not carefully, desperately, like she was oxygen, and he'd been drowning. His hands cupped her face, thumbs wiping away tears she didn't know she'd shed. She kissed him back, just as fiercely, fingers fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. I don't deserve you, Sebastian whispered against her forehead. That's not your choice to make. Isabel? The moment shattered. Sebastian's phone rang. He checked it, face going white. It's my estate, lawyer. There's been... Harrison called an emergency board meeting tonight. He's pushing for an immediate vote to remove me as trustee, based on the permit violations. Can he do that? If the board agrees, I'm mismanaging the restoration. Yes. Sebastian's voice was dead. He'll argue I'm putting the estate at risk, that I'm in over my head, that the violations prove I'm unfit. Then we go to the meeting, present our documentation, prove him wrong. He's spent months poisoning them against me. They'll believe him before they believe us. Isabel grabbed both his hands. Then we give them something they can't deny. The truth, all of it. That night, they stood before the Newport Historical Commission, 8 board members, including Harrison, who sat at the head of the table like a king judging peasants. Sebastian presented their case: documentation, photographs, provenance, papers proving every single material was period authentic, or as close as possible without destroying other historic buildings. Harrison countered smoothly. The spirit of the law matters more than technical compliance. These gardens have been dormant for decades. Trying to resurrect them in 6 months is hubris. My cousin is rushing, cutting corners, putting the estate's historical integrity at risk to meet an arbitrary deadline. The deadline isn't arbitrary, Sebastian said quietly. It's in my father's will. Your father's will was written when he was ill and grieving. We all know he wasn't thinking clearly. Harrison's voice dripped false sympathy. This isn't about the gardens, Sebastian. It's about you refusing to accept that some things can't be fixed. Some things should be allowed to die with dignity. Like your business ventures that failed. Isabel spoke before she could stop herself. Every eye turned to her. I'm sorry, I don't mean to be rude. But I've been researching the estate's financial history, and I've noticed something odd. She pulled out her notes. The discrepancies she'd been tracking for months. These are purchase orders from 1985 through 1995. Materials bought, but never planted. Suppliers that don't exist anymore. Payments that total nearly $500,000 over 10 years. All signed off by, she checked the signature, Harrison Ashford, estate business manager. The room went silent. Harrison's face went cold. Those are old records. Clerical errors. You have no idea what you're talking about. Maybe. Isabel kept her voice level, but I think the estate's lawyers should investigate. Before we discuss who's mismanaging what. The board chair cleared his throat. Mr. Ashford, perhaps we should table this vote until... This is a distraction, Harrison snapped. An attempt to deflect from my cousin's failures by throwing around baseless accusations. They're not baseless. Sebastian's voice cut through the room like ice. I've seen the same records, the same patterns. And Isabel's right. Someone should investigate thoroughly. The meeting dissolved into chaos. Accusations, demands for documentation, Harrison's carefully constructed attack crumbling as board members who'd been ready to vote against. Sebastian suddenly had questions about financial discrepancies spanning decades. In the end, the vote was postponed, pending investigation. Isabel and Sebastian walked out into the April night, both shaking. You were incredible, Sebastian said quietly. I've never seen anyone stand up to Harrison like that. I was terrified. I might have just destroyed both our lives. Or saved them. He stopped walking, turned to face her. What you said in there about falling in love with me, I meant it. Even knowing I'm a disaster, that I don't know how to do this, that I might fail and lose everything anyway. Yes. Sebastian kissed her again, slower this time. Tender, like she was something precious he was afraid to break. Then I need to tell you something, he whispered. I'm falling in love with you, too. Have been since I drove you home on New Year's Eve, and you asked if it was too late to start over? Isabel's eyes filled with tears. You said it wasn't possible for you. I lied. His smile was sad and beautiful and hopeful all at once. Or maybe I was just waiting for someone brave enough to prove me wrong. They drove back to the estate in silence, hands intertwined. Neither noticed Harrison's car following at a distance. Neither knew that while they'd been fighting for their future, he'd been planning how to destroy it. The accusations came 3 weeks before the deadline. Isabel was in the greenhouse when Sebastian appeared in the doorway, holding a manila envelope. His face was ash white. Harrison filed formal charges. Sebastian's voice was completely flat. He's claiming you've been stealing from the estate. Antique garden sculptures. Historical items. Selling them online to cover your shop's debts. The world tilted. That's insane. I would never. I know. Sebastian handed her the envelope. But he has evidence. eBay listings, in your name, receipts. Photographs of items that match estate inventory. Isabel's hands shook as she opened it. There, screenshots of online auctions, her name, her shop's address, estate items she'd never seen before. This is fabricated. All of it. I believe you. Sebastian's voice cracked. But Harrison's threatening to go to the police. To the press, he's given me an ultimatum. He couldn't look at her. You have to fire me, Isabel said numbly. Ban me from the property, or he'll press charges and ruin both of us. It's more than that. Single quotes. Sebastian's hands curled into fists. He's called an emergency estate board vote for tomorrow. If I don't remove you immediately, he'll argue I'm complicit, that I'm endangering historical assets. The board will remove me as trustee tonight instead of waiting for the July deadline. And he's threatening to contact my mother. She's still fragile from losing my father. If she hears about this before I can explain. You don't have a choice, Isabel said quietly. There has to be another way. There isn't. She was surprisingly calm, like watching herself from a distance. If they vote you out tonight, we lose everything. The estate, your father's legacy, any chance to prove I'm innocent later. At least if I leave voluntarily, you keep fighting until July. You can still save the hotel. I don't care about the hotel. Sebastian's voice broke. Not if it means losing you. Yes, you do. And you should. Isabel set down the envelope with hands that barely shook. This estate is your family's history. Your parents' legacy. It matters more than 6 months with someone you barely know. Don't. Sebastian crossed to her, grabbed her shoulders. Don't diminish what we have. Isabel looked him in the eyes. Do you believe I stole from you? Sebastian opened his mouth, closed it. 1 second, but in that second, everything broke. You do, she whispered. After everything, you actually believe I don't, Sebastian said desperately. Isabel, I don't. But Harrison has photographs, receipts, a paper trail, but the hotel matters more. Her voice was flat, devastated. I understand, she continued, stepping back from his touch. The deadline is 3 weeks away. If you fight Harrison on this and lose tonight, it's all over. If I leave quietly, you still have a chance. It's the smart choice. Isabel, I'll pack tonight. Be gone by morning. She turned away so he wouldn't see her face. Thank you for the opportunity. I hope you save the estate. I really do. Please. His voice was raw. Just give me time to find proof, to clear your name. Don't leave thinking I chose property over you. But you did. She said it without anger. Just acceptance. And maybe that's okay. Maybe caring for what we can protect is all any of us can do. She walked out of the greenhouse. Sebastian didn't follow. Isabel packed in numb silence. 6 months, condensed into 2 suitcases. The cottage, that had started feeling like home, reduced to a temporary stop. She left the keys on the kitchen counter. She didn't cry until she was 3 blocks away, driving toward her mother's tiny apartment, believing with absolute certainty that she'd just lost the only man she'd ever truly loved. Sebastian stood alone in his office, staring at the fabricated evidence, and felt something inside him die. He'd let her go. Harrison had backed him into a corner. Choose the estate, or choose her. and he'd frozen. 1 second of hesitation that cost him everything. The estate board voted to let him continue as trustee. Harrison withdrew the emergency motion once Isabel was removed from the property. "Clean hands," the board chair said approvingly. Sebastian had never felt dirtier. The deadline loomed. 3 weeks. The gardens were unfinished without Isabel. Permits still frozen. And the only person who could save it all thought he'd betrayed her. He returned to the estate library at 2 in the morning, desperate for anything, any proof, any evidence that could clear her name. The old ledgers sat where Isabel had left them, her notes still marking discrepancies she'd tracked for months. He started reading. Really reading. And what he found made his blood run cold. Harrison hadn't just fabricated evidence against Isabel. He'd been embezzling from the estate for 15 years. And Sebastian had the proof. Dawn broke over Newport in shades of pink and gold. Sebastian hadn't slept. He'd spent the entire night tracing Harrison's embezzlement through decades of carefully hidden transactions. Isabel had been right. The pattern was there if you knew what to look for. Suppliers that didn't exist, materials purchased but never delivered, payments funneled through shell companies. Harrison controlled $500,000, maybe more. Sebastian called his estate lawyer at 5 a.m. Presented everything. The lawyer's response was immediate. "This is criminal we feely today. Harrison will be arrested by end of week." But Sebastian didn't go to the police first. He got in his car and drove to the address he'd memorized from Isabel's contract, an address he'd promised himself he'd never use unless absolutely necessary. Her mother's apartment was in a part of town where old Newport met economic reality. 3 stories of weathered brick. Fire escapes decorated with potted plants that someone tended with care. He found Isabel on the 3rd floor fire escape, kneeling beside cracked pots, coaxing tiny roses to survive in impossible conditions. She looked up, saw him, went completely still. "Isabel." His voice was hoarse from no sleep and too much grief. "I need to show you something." He climbed the fire escape, expensive suit completely out of place, not caring, sat beside her on the metal grating and opened the file folder he'd brought. "You were right," he said, "about the ledgers. The discrepancies. It wasn't clerical error. Harrison was stealing from the estate for 15 years, and I have proof." Isabel's hands went still on the roses. "I called the lawyer an hour ago," Sebastian continued. "Harrison will be arrested. Charged. Removed from the trust permanently. The evidence you fabricated against you, it'll be thrown out. You're cleared." "Then why are you here?" Her voice was carefully neutral. "You could have called." "Because clearing your name isn't enough." Sebastian's hands were shaking. "Because I need you to understand what I've done." He pulled out a second document. New contract, her name at the top. "This isn't employment," he said quietly. "It's partnership, co-trustee of the estate gardens. Your name on the deed. Equal decision-making power, legally binding." Isabel stared at the paper like it might bite. "I did this before Harrison's arrest was finalized," Sebastian continued. "If the evidence doesn't hold, if something goes wrong and he fights back, you and I both lose everything. The estate, the gardens, all of it. I chose you anyway. I should have done it 3 weeks ago." "Why?" Isabel's voice broke. "Why risk everything?" Sebastian took her dirt-stained hands in his. "Because I love you," he said. Not carefully, not rationally. Completely. "I love you because you see beauty in broken things. You gave your dinner to a stranger. You brought roses back from the dead. You taught me that generosity isn't weakness. It's the bravest thing in the world." Tears started down Isabel's face. "I love you," Sebastian continued, voice rough with emotion. Because you didn't run when things got hard. Because you stood in front of a hostile board and defended me. Because you asked if it was too late to start over and then proved with every single day that it isn't. He cupped her face, thumbs, wiping away tears. I was wrong to hesitate. Wrong to let you think I chose property over you. Wrong to protect myself instead of protecting us. His voice cracked. I don't just want you in my life, Isabel. I want you as my equal. My partner. In the gardens. In the stacci. In everything. Will you come back? Isabel couldn't speak, could barely breathe. I know I broke your trust, Sebastian whispered. I know that 1 second of hesitation hurt you, and I will spend the rest of my life proving that I choose you every single day, no matter what it costs. Isabel launched herself at him, kissed him hard, crying and laughing at the same time, fingers tangled in his hair, tasting salt and hope and second chances. Yes, she said against his mouth. Yes, I'll come back. Yes, to all of it. Sebastian kissed her until they were both breathless, until the sun climbed higher, and the city woke around them, and the tiny roses in their cracked pots bloomed in the growing light. The deadline is 2 weeks away, Isabel finally said. Can we still finish? With you. I believe we can do anything. They drove back to the estate together, hands intertwined, as the ocean stretched infinite and beautiful beyond the cliffs. The gardens were waiting. So was their future. July 4th arrived with perfect weather. The estate gardens blazed with color. Heritage roses climbing ancient trellises, lavender borders, marking paths that hadn't existed in decades. Herb gardens, restored to exactly how they'd looked in 1924 photographs. 3 months of brutal work. Isabel and Sebastian, side by side, racing the deadline, refusing to fail. Harrison had been arrested in May, charged with embezzlement and fraud, removed from the trust permanently. The estate board had apologized profusely to Sebastian and Isabel both. None of it mattered as much as this moment. The board walked through the completed gardens in awed silence. Period authentic. Plantings. Historical accuracy verified by outside consultants. Documentation meticulous and irrefutable. It's extraordinary, the board chair finally said. Your father would be proud. The vote was unanimous. The estate was Sebastian's. Permanently. Unconditionally. That evening, as the gala celebration raged in the hotel and fireworks prepared to explode over the harbor, Sebastian found Isabel in the rose garden they'd planted together. She knelt beside the climbing roses, deadheading spent blooms, lost in the work she loved. Isabel. She looked up. Sebastian stood on the garden path, holding a small velvet box, looking more nervous than she'd ever seen him. I know this is fast, he said quietly. 6 months ago you climbed into my car thinking I was a driver. Asked if it was too late to start over. And I told you it wasn't possible for me. But maybe for you. He knelt in the dirt beside her, not caring about his formal suit. I was wrong, he continued. It's possible for both of us. Because of you. Because you're brave enough to believe in second chances even when they terrify you. He opened the box, a simple, hingy, vintage, delicate, a single diamond that caught the fading light. Marry me, Sebastian said. Be my partner. My equal. The person who brings beauty back to broken things. Let me spend the rest of my life learning how to be half as kind as you. Isabel's vision blurred with tears. Yes, she whispered. Yes. To everything. Yes to second chances, and choosing bravely, and building something beautiful together. Sebastian slipped the ring onto her finger, kissed her soft and deep and full of promises they'd both keep. Fireworks exploded over the harbor. gold and silver against the deepening sky, the same sky that had witnessed their first meeting, the same ocean that had watched them rebuild what everyone said was impossible. "I love you," Isabel said against his mouth. "I love you," Sebastian answered. "Thank you for teaching me. It's never too late." They stayed in the garden until the fireworks faded and the gala ended and the estate grew quiet around them. Two people who'd both believed they were too broken to be fixed, proving together that the bravest thing you can do is trust again. 2 years later, the estate gardens had never looked more alive. Roses bloomed in impossible profusion. Lavender borders attracted butterflies and bees. The greenhouse overflowed with heritage varieties Isabel cultivated and sold to other restoration projects across the country. Morgan Ashford Gardens, the sign read, partnership in every sense. Isabel photographed Sebastian with their daughter, 8 months old, with his dark eyes and her stubborn determination. The baby laughed as he lifted her gently, tiny hands reaching for his face. "She has your kindness," Sebastian said, watching Isabel work. "And your determination," she replied, snapping another photo. He crossed to her, daughter in his arms, and kissed her temple. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For climbing into my car that night. For asking if it was too late. For being brave enough to prove me wrong." Isabel set down her camera, wrapped her arms around both of them. Her family, her home, her proof that broken things could bloom again. "Thank you," she said, "for driving me home, and for believing that second chances are possible." "Not just possible," Sebastian corrected gently. "Inevitable, if you're brave enough." Some people believe love is found in grand gestures, in perfection, in fearless certainty. But the deepest love grows in quiet moments, in tea left on a desk when someone works too late, in hands held steady when the world shakes, in two people who choose each other, not despite their brokenness, but because they understand that healing is something you do together. The gardens bloomed. The ocean stretched beyond the cliffs, and two people who'd once believed they were too late proved that the bravest thing you can do is start over. Together, but the deepest love grows in quiet moments, in tea left on a desk when someone works too late, in hands held steady when the world shakes, in two people who choose each other not despite their brokenness, but because they understand that healing is something you do together. The gardens bloomed. The ocean stretched beyond the cliffs, and two people who'd once believed they were too late proved that the bravest thing you can do is start over. Together. If you made it all the way to the end, please subscribe. It really helps the channel grow. I'd love to hear from you. On a scale of 0 to 10, how did this story make you feel? Drop your rating in the comments. I will read every single one. I'm truly grateful you're here. See you in the next story.